Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 84. Easy one, 84, right? But the problem with it being the easy numerical inspiration, speaking of 1984 or 84 in the George Orwell reference, will lead you down a path of dystopia. And again, I am straddling the fence between, optimism, blind optimism, trying to be half full in my thinking, using some tools of inspiration and art to stay upbeat and to hang in there, and then having the intellectual capacity, not in any off-putting way, but not being able to ignore certain aspects of society, obviously, that could possibly be even worse than Orwell imagined. But if you have ever listened to this before, I've always said that the artist goes first, that the imagining has to happen, and then engineers and comp sci people and scientists kind of make it so, meaning robots, driverless cars, submarine 20,000 leagues under the sea, U-boats, flying to space, Mars is next, mission to Mars, living out in outer space. All that stuff was science fiction or conjured imagination, or and so that it belies the optimism I feel about, or I am sort of trying to train myself to feel. It belies that because 1984 is vivid in its prediction, and maybe nothing new under the sun. I think a good writer of his time would have said that this is already here in terms of society's the dark hand that we always refer to. I think he was using an analogy or a metaphor to say, we rat on each other. We, and now these devices have made Big Brother, and the idea of a camera in your home and thought speech and all that stuff is happening, right? And Big Brother, and then I guess for years, people who talked about Orwellian nightmares said that, maybe the one thing he didn't predict is that we were Big Brother, right? That we would volunteer for this stuff, And I guess I haven't read it since high school because it was a bummer. It was one of the easier books to read because I think people call it a dystopian thing, but there's science fiction there, right? Because of the imagined world had technology yet to be evidenced. So I guess what I should say is that the power of the individual genius of George Orwell is why I stay optimistic, and why I favor the arts as a solution-based imagining. Obviously, the idea that, and that's where I think we've lost it, right? We've lost the collaborative spirit. We've lost it, and that the game of Monopoly, not necessarily monopolies of corporations, but the game of Monopoly is to make sure you have all the money and nobody else does in the game. And so why that game endures is that it's actually what has happened when you hoard all the, and I'm not trying to speak in terms of like thinking, how do I say it? I'm not trying to advocate for revolution, other than a revolution of spirit, I suppose. But we all forget the collaborative nature of things, and the interconnectedness of humans. we understand very well the interconnectedness of the web, right? That's why it's called the web, right? Because it's link on top of link on top of link on top of link communicating, and so we understand that. But think about what has to occur for a revolution is the collaboration, and what I'm really getting at is George Orwell wrote that, so that is fairly clear that that's a solo pursuit, the writer, the painter. But I'm a performing artist, so we need collaborators. We need the script if we're not the writer and the performer. We need the director. We need the stage. We need the costumes. We need the... And what I'm saying is, unfortunately, George Orwell was just the artistic vision part. And I think he was saying, don't go this route. But because the imagination is a powerful thing, it gave ideas that could then manifest themselves in reality. And it's almost as if the marching order came from him in the twisted way. He was trying to say this is a warning, and then opportunists or everybody working alone and not collaborating and not putting in the art, the ethics, not putting in the unintended consequences. Your mandate as a scientist or as an engineer is, if it's possible, what can you keep making possible? And that is the thrust. And so I understand it. It's why you find solutions in the editing room in a film. It's why you have to figure it out on the fly if there's a nightmare scene change on tech rehearsal, that you have to solve those solutions. And so the writer had this idea that the chandelier would fall in Phantom of the Opera, and that was easier to do in film, and then they had to find a way to do it on stage. And I don't know how well that worked in the early divisions of it or in the early iterations of it, but it's a marching order from the artist, from the creator, essentially. And that's what is funny about language in George Orwell's world, is that they do make you change the meaning of words, and so there's an argument for almost every discipline being the way into this hopeless inevitability of totalitarianism, right? Because there are linguistics, right? That McWhirter guy, that linguistics have a lot to do with mind control, or with using incendiary words, and then either you demolish the meaning or you make it high, and that's obviously, it used to annoy me. I knew someone back in New York, they were kind of active in the scene, and they'd go to a lot of premieres and stuff, and they would literally come back from every movie saying it's the best thing I've ever seen. And I get it, but that's like a harmless version of hyperbole, right? That's the best movie I ever saw. And certainly if that person in this case was talking about Drop Zone, Wesley Snipes' Drop Zone, that can't be true. It couldn't have been true the night that this person saw the movie, but they literally said it's the best movie I ever saw, not knowing that theatrical elements and context provided her the premiere. I've learned, I've not been to many, but I've learned that screening, that cast and crew screening, having a red carpet, all of that stuff leading to this film. If every movie, like, it will be graceful, we'll say every movie starts with a 5, and the goal of any film is to do better than 5 up to 10. So you're only trying to cover the 5. We're just assuming all these movies with premieres and things are at least a 5. And you go to the screening and you know the people and you see the stars and the lights go down, and that's why movies are always more effective and better in the theater. But then it's a screening and then somebody comes out to wave and the whole thing, and then the credits roll and people clap, and if it's a 5, that means it's working. And so by the time you leave, I would say after a premiere, a movie that stays at a 5 or maybe gets up to 5.5 or 6 at a screening goes into 7-8 category because of the exuberance, right? And so that is the context matters, right? And so she could very well have. Now I was being a critical jerk by saying the joke was, it's called Drop Zone with Wesley Snipes. It's not up there with The Godfather. Can't be the best movie you've ever seen, or you've only seen 3 movies in your life. I was being one of those, contrarians, but I can understand why, if we're going to give it a 5 to start, that she got it up to a 7 or an 8, and maybe, because it's action, I don't know, but to call it the best movie I ever saw, that's hyperbole, right? And that is what that's what they're trying to do with advertising, right? Famously, right, we joke about Corinthian leather, and if you're old enough to remember, I think it was a Lincoln, and I think it was Ricardo Montalban, who you would know from Fantasy Island as Mr. Rourke, or more famously as Khan in The Wrath of Khan for all the Trekkies. But Ricardo Montalban was a suave Spaniard, or I think maybe he's even Chilean, or he might be South American, I don't know. But he was very suave, and he kept his accent, and he was, there's a Ricardo Montalban theater. He may even be Mexican, I'm not exactly sure, but Ricardo Montalban was a presence for sure, and a presence in a lot of Gen X's childhoods. And then The Wrath of Khan, he lives on as one of the better of the Star Trek films. Ricardo Montalban was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been a Mercury. I'm thinking it's a Lincoln, but Lincoln Mercury maybe. But he would tell you, fine, if an instrument panel to die for, a fine dashboard with instruments, and a fine Corinthian leather. And so that's even still in the ether as a pop culture reference, but what we know is that Corinthian leather is just it was an adjective, it was a hyperbolic ad man word to describe whatever the hell was on the seats in this fine automobile that Ricardo Montalban was selling. And so to say it's the greatest, that's why they catch you in New York City for a long time. They would do these commercials for Broadway, and they would catch people coming out of the theater, and they'd be like, it's better than Cats, right? But they would do the advent of video. They'd have the video cameras, and they'd get into people's faces on the way out. Now, like, an equivalent to that now is to use night vision and to put a camera, a still cam, like not a still camera, but a hidden camera in a screening of a horror film, and you see the jump scares. And that's an equivalent of a modern way to get, you're trying to show that there's visceral reactions. That's a good horror movie. Or you're trying to catch somebody bursting out of the door of the theater, and it's like, Empire Strikes Back was amazing, and then they probably had to cut around people going, Luke, I'm your father, And these are all ad and exuberant theatrical techniques. And so we get better at this shit. And I think that's also where George Orwell was a genius, and also way too prescient, because these uses of language are employed, and they're not employed necessarily for the good of man or the good of each other, and again, I don't want to use specifics, but slogans that are short and punchy are going to win the day in the soft matter of ad. It's all admin. It's all advertising, right? And what happens, I also think, and McWhirter would be better at and better qualified to speak on this, and I've used this example of an acting class where using different words was a way to, I hope was a teaching instrument and not like a form of mind control, right? But that's also a little bit of a litmus test to see how far your constituency can go. If you can get people to use words like intersectionality or systemic, or these things, if you can get these words that are really only exist in like thesis, there are these sort of stratas, and I think what the internet, the information bulging over, is for the good, because then you can find a way not to be susceptible, which George Orwell was probably writing in a time where he had the insight, but the rest of us did not, right? Uncle Sam, he wants you, and all that stuff was probably baked in the cake of propaganda, right? And what is an advertisement but propaganda for a specific product, right? And now that products, because we don't sell physical media anymore, we're selling subscriptions, and and maybe that was short-sighted on the side of the purveyors of this stuff, and that's why it's got to go a whole different direction, because there aren't individual units to sell anymore. And we all know the big business and the big payout is in soap. The big payout is in, there's more Old Spice deodorant than there are copies of Nevermind being sold. And that's always been the case, right? There, so you want to sell widgets. They used to, and what happened is in film, this sort of narrative of being a sellout was I'm selling widgets, or being a sellout was in The Graduate when the guy said, the future's plastics, There was the counterculture thing of like, don't be a widget maker, don't sell. I forget what film it is where the guy's fortune was in selling shower curtain rings. And so that's not necessarily what artists do, and certainly not what someone would go to grad school or PhD to start talking about. But what happens is these, when academic words bleed into conversation, you're either at a very highfalutin conversation, or, the argument could be made that they are quote unquote weaponized, right? And so to kind of get off the George Orwell thing, I also think that a lot of beautiful movies and plays are made that the actual theme, the actual crisis, in my thinking, is being inarticulate. And I don't mean that in any way of whatever the word choices would be, or if someone is well spoken. I don't mean it that way. But being inarticulate is not being able to say exactly what you mean, lack of precision in words, and how many times can the wrong thing be said? How many of these, and that's why we watch drama, right? We don't watch well-adjusted people having interactions, right? You have to watch the worst day. I've heard a couple podcasts recently where someone said, this is, the coincidence thing. The coincidence thing is what you avoid, meaning, you can't have a flat tire and someone spilling a drink and you're on the same flight. You get one of those, right? For a romance to start, you get seated next to somebody in first class because you got bumped up, or you got probably more comical as the first class gets demoted back to coach, and then so it looks like it's going to be a bad flight, except you sit next to the love of your life. You get one of those, but there are a lot of movies these days that you have that happen, and then and then when they leave the plane, they say goodbye. They don't get a phone number, and then the whole thing is. And then the second, I don't know, maybe you get two. I don't know, but you try to write without those coincidences. And I say that to say, when you're watching the movie, you're play acting with the characters. And so when someone is saying something wrong that starts an action or says something unforgivable, you're sitting there in the audience going, no, if you had only just said, but then that, and so what is, that's people who can't express themselves, can be, and I'm really blanking on a specific example of this, which belies my thesis, but Good Will Hunting, Will's inability to articulate his trauma to the love of his life is where he almost loses his love of his life, right? And other people might see a different theme there, which is that you have to get over your trauma to live your best life. Any of these themes that you're probably writing to one. You're writing a good story, hopefully, and there's vivid interactions, and then there's an unintended positive consequence of themes emerging, right? If Rocky is only about a guy gets a chance to not live this desperate life, and if he can show he's got class, that's a good story. And then if there's a B plot, it's the love story. And the idea that he says to age, I've always thought that he says we did it, and I've been wrong about that for a long time. He does say I did it, I think, in Rocky 2 when he finally wins. But when he says Adrian, and he loses, right? But I'm saying there's unintended consequences of other themes emerging based on a very good classical structure, if you will. But when you're talking about word choice or it's why we're in so much trouble, I think, to a degree, that there is so many talking heads spewing regurgitated stuff, and the show doesn't exist. But if the moderator said, hey, what are you so unhappy about, they'd be like, hey, don't get personal, and that's probably true too. But I have to filter out my own feelings, and I have to filter what comes through my transom, if you will. And so the hyperbolic nature of people using incendiary words it will fry you out, in my thinking. I think what is I can only speak about like bartending and being in the restaurant business for so long. I don't know if any of this is neurologically true. I know my back counts the score. My lower back is fried out because of years of cranking out drinks in a ice bin that is lower than my waist, and to have to do it so fast, and to have a busted up knee, so I didn't always do things right with the knee bends, and I have flat feet, and so my body, that the body keeps the score, tells me where I've been. But I think another consequence of high-paced, high adrenalized jobs is that you're kind of fried out. There's an emotional aspect to it, and it's night work, and so there's this dread that comes over me that it's taking time to get out of my system. There's this dread at certain points of the night, like this is where it would be getting busy, where we say in comedy, and then I did stand-up, which was another adrenalized life. So there's this, you either kill or you bomb. Or you died. I ate a dick. I fucking shit the bed. When you bomb, it's bad. But when you win, you kill. You destroy. You obliterated the room. Those are your two choices, every time you get up there. And also in a restaurant, if the consequence of bombing on stage is you take the loss as a indictment of your talent, of your ability, of your life choices come up. The drives home from bad shows are lonely drives. I'll say that, especially if you're 3,000 miles from home, and especially if you it didn't go well, and then you're wondering what the fuck you did to yourself. And those are lonely rides, but then literally a crushing can keep you good. You go into even your day job the next day, and you're a bad motherfucker. I'm a bad dude, and this is what I did. And and then if you work in a busy restaurant that doesn't have slow nights, then you're like, I'm always Johnny on the spot. I'm always in the place to be. I'm always cranking out. I'm always showing my proficiency by how many did we do? How many covers? What do we do? What do we wind up doing by the end of the night? Oh shit. And then you find out that's 300. You did 300. Wow. 300 times how many? So 300 times minimum 2. 2 drinks minimum, imagine. That's 600, that you can do 1,000 drinks a night, busting your ass. That's not even the waters and you're doing it and you're ringing them up and then your day off you're gonna try to do stage time and now I'm just at this place where I feel like almost devoid of emotion, and I need my emotion because now what I really wanted to do was be an actor, and an actor has to stay supple to his feelings. I talked about this last week. They talk about thin skin, and I may have overstepped that metaphor or that analogy, but there's no, they said no excuse. There is no option to be such a specialist anymore. And I straddle the fence of that last generation of there is a pathway to being a professional actor, and it goes through these 5 or 6 schools and auditions and then regional theater and then eventually some TV film work and then you're on your way. Like that doesn't exist as a plan anymore. And believe me, at my age, in my time, I was the rarer bird for having been declared so adamantly, and to see it bearing fruit and going for it. Now, it's I don't imagine it's, I don't know, maybe it's quadrupled. I don't know. I think maybe most actors today don't fantasize about a life in the theater, or I know that's always been the rage at the British and Australian actors, is that their training gets them to a higher place of esteem in the casting world, and that's why they come over here and quote unquote do an American accent better than we can, and that's a lamentable thing. But we few that have had that classical training still think we can compete, but slowly but surely, like data points and what's been done in the marketplace, all of this stuff erodes. And then, there's a great, I hope I don't get emotional recounting it, but there's a great song that came as one of the few bonus tracks on one of Springsteen's greatest hits compilations. Greatest hits records, I think they come with your record deal. So back in the day when you used to sell records, you would sign a contract, and if you ever got to the end of your contract where you owed them 6 or 5 or 10, whatever it was, let's just say 5, after your 5th album, the company's guaranteed to, you contractually have to release a greatest hits package. And it's a lot harder for I loved a band called the Hooters. They had 2 hits, and then I don't know, to put their greatest hits together is going to be mostly half of the first album, and who knows what else. Bruce had more hits than many, so that was an easier thing, and so I think they may have gone double album with the greatest hits, like they did with Billy Joel, who put out a lot of hits. So, but there's a song, Blood Brothers, on the greatest hits, first one anyway, and that's an incredible song because it's just a love letter to his band, but because you use metaphor and you use melody and you use rhythm and tempo, you can interpret it your blood brother, your friends along the way. But one of the lines that Bruce, toward the end, it gets a little like country rap, or spoken word, where he says, well, the hardness of this world slowly slowly grinds your dreams away, making a fool's joker, of the promises we keep. And I don't know how I feel. I don't know why I wrote this song or if any of this matters at all, but I'll keep running through the dark with you in my heart, my blood brothers. And but the hardness of this world, or harshness of this world, slowly grinds your dreams away. I feel a little grinded down. I think we all do. And that's coming from a guy who got everything that could be promised an aspirant. He got everything out of his talent. He got everything out of a career. His timing was perfect. What he had to say was resonant. And what he was able to put together as terms of a work ethic and a catalog. It's part of why I don't listen to Bruce a lot, but why he is my North Star as an artist, just because of his diligence in the craft and the ability to get better, or to get different, or to ride the wave. And it may be debatable whether I want to hear or you want to hear what he has to say about things. He's an older cat, so I think that becomes more important to people. But for someone to have had it all go his way, and then to still have insight into, the harshness of this world, he still lost friends. Maybe he even found out that he was, but he got his family too. He got it all. And I'm just saying that when they tell an actor to sort of, the persistent part has nothing to do with I've had to learn to separate them out. You can't method act life. I'm giving away stuff in my one-man show, but I literally think I was Daniel Day-Lewising my stand-up career, that I was method acting in real time the role of a stand-up comedian. That may be overstating it for dramatic effect, but the abilities of a stand-up are different than the abilities of an actor. If you're an actor playing a stand-up comedian in a film and you bomb, the camera needs to capture your crestfallenness. The acting version of the ride home from bombing is probably with some fucking Nebraska Springsteen song on just driving home like that. The camera's got to see the defeat, just as he's got to see, I fucking did it. I'm the man. You have to see all of that. But as a stand-up comedian, if you're teetering on the edge of bombing and you're going to pull out with a good joke or with the going right into the audience, you have to be bulletproof. That's the sort of mark and badge of honor for a stand-up comic, is to be bulletproof, to be bomb-proof, to be so good that they can't deny you. And that's also how it is with an actor in terms of marketplace and putting out performances. But to put out a performance as an actor means to be vulnerable, to have your emotions on display, to sometimes show ugly sides of yourself, to say really awkward shit that you didn't write because you wouldn't, because you're a different person than the character, and then to say them with feeling. That a lot of people say, oh, they're professional liars. I think that's I resent that as a trying to be an honest person, but not always achieving it. But a comic doesn't have to go through those machinations. They say their piece and you laugh or you don't, and sometimes they get defensive when you don't, and then that's part of the humor that ensues. And then now there's crowd work and all that stuff. But I think the job of a comic is more a preacher of my philosophy, right? That's the great KRS-One, like that, my philosophy. Rappers and comics, they are metronomically imperturbable toward their goal of delivering their rhyme, delivering their jokes, getting through the message. But an actor is reacting off of somebody else, needs the other person there, needs at very least the cue to react, the cue to passion, and that puts you in a vulnerable position. And then, of course, as you get into the career, you find out how vulnerable you are to the ebbs and flows of the universal indifference to what the fuck you want, and how ill-fated some careers can seem, and yours, and how they tell you another one, don't take anything in life personally. I love that one. That helps. That helps, but that's taken me a long time, because it's your life, it's your dream, it's your wish, it's your I get it. You don't want to take the agony of insult every step of the way. I mean, that's what road rage is, literally somebody cutting you off. How dare you? Do you know what I'm going through? And it's like and you never think, I've been honked at. I may have made a bad maneuver on the road. Everybody's so sure that they're the virtuous one going through these things. And I guess that's the problem with media being so 24/7, is that everybody is the star, but also everybody is is equipped with too much knowledge, too much. Every jerk off can do a food critique video sitting in their car, and every jerk off can do this. They press the button. I don't usually come out here and do this, but a lot's on my mind, man. And it's just like, oh, here we go. You're sitting in a fucking Wawa parking lot, dude. Like, why are you doing a monologue, right? And I'm the one who wants to do the monologue, what it's done is it's just degraded our ability to be impressed, or our ability to decipher, or our ability to see the genuine article. We used to assume that anybody on camera was a person of authority, and that was a mistake too, right? Because now we know that some of these jerk-offs left to their own devices are useless, right? Similarly, at award shows, you see these actors with their own words, and they're like, and it's like you just played H.L. Mencken in the fucking movie, and now you can't even, you're monosyllabic, right? And so, but there was a barrier to entry. There were fewer cameras. It was harder. It was gate kept. And now every jerk off, myself right now, as we speak included, has a camera and lighting and a microphone. And it just, why would we pay to watch someone do it like this much better than me, right? And I take the point, I guess, of what Ryan Gosling said recently about it's not the audience's job to save cinema. It's our job to make better movies. I mean, how can you argue with that? That's a very stoic and very responsible way to put it on yourself, and that is true. And maybe that is the only North Star. And so to be impressive today, maybe it's got to be that much better, I suppose. And George Orwell, I don't know what happens in that one. I think he falls in love, right? And that became a vulnerability because he fell in love with someone who was going to rat him out, I think, right? It's a tragedy, it's dystopian in its resolution. It doesn't work out. Love does not conquer all in 1984, and maybe it doesn't ever, but it can for me and it can for you, but you have to have your own terms. You have to have your own parameters. You have to have, that look in the mirror. You got to figure it out what it is. I haven't figured it out. And then another great, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And, there's no upside to sharing that, right? That's the problem, right? There are people I'm not pretending to be on a podcast. I'm addressing you, the viewer. I'm talking out loud to myself, but there is the people who do this one where it's just this shot and they're like, and then they speak on authority on regurgitated information about narcissists. Apparently narcissists is like a subject we've all encountered, I'm sure, but how many times are we hacking other people? Here's 20 years of therapy in 5 lessons. It's listicles, but there's a whole and maybe I just don't know all their podcasts, but they never cut to the other person. There are people faking the funk about being on a podcast. I may be faking the funk that I am of any authority to speak on anything, but at least I am telling you now that this is, the death sessions are just me in a room. And I will tell you, I keep jumping on these things because I want to keep momentum and I don't want to lose my energy and my spirit when I get ready to set up the stuff, but I forget to do the business of the songs that are next, right? But I have another story. I've mentioned a couple songs that won't go in the description, but Blood Brothers, maybe I'll put Blood Brothers in the description. Bruce Springsteen. It's not one of the bigger ones, but fans love it. And you know, if he does Blood Brothers when you go to a concert with your buddies, I'll tell you, in 1999, Bruce had that little dalliance with, they say he fired, but he did say to the E Street Band, I want to work with other people. He had that dalliance sort of after he won his Oscar for Philadelphia, Streets of Philadelphia, and those two Lucky Town, those mid-90s, early 90s albums that he released, Lucky Town and Human Touch, that wasn't the E Street Band. And so he was, you know, described by others and people who had shit to say as in the wilderness, you know, working with studio musicians or that LA sound, you know, whatever. And then the greatest hits kind of came around in the 90s too. And if you're any kind of fan, you're like, I don't need the greatest hits. You know, you should have all of that in your catalog, you know. But those damn bonus tracks, right? And then you want every studio release, right? And in 1999, he reformed the E Street Band and packaged a tour. And I don't know if that coincided an album, but I'll tell you what, man, I was still on the East Coast. I could still get together with my friends and go to a parking lot in the Meadowlands in New Jersey. And it was the first time that the whole band was going to be back together in some time. And, you know, you're there with your boys and, you know, the power of rock and roll and the power of that cat. And you hear Blood Brothers, man. And, you know, it's about these guys, you know, and we're in the parking lot. We even made it into the paper. Somehow there was a reporter from the New York Post going around. And he saw this crew. And I got quoted in the Post about the reunion of Bruce coming out. And so did my other buddy. And they quoted me and they spelled my name right. And I said I was an actor. And I was just like, you know, it was so many synchronistic moments that I'm sure were felt 20,000 times in those circles. And so is it the message? Is it the messenger? Is it the synchronicity? Is it just communing? Could it have been anybody else? Yeah, maybe, but also maybe not. And to hear Blood Brothers in 1999 with your Blood Brothers, your band, you know, people, hopefully some were still in touch, you know, that's power. That's powerful. That is, you know, what's the difference? And in 1984, coincidentally, after all this rambling about it, is the year Born in the USA was released, which as far as the public is concerned, that is the breakthrough of Bruce Springsteen. As far as his fans, it could even demarcate where they stop paying attention, whatever. For me, that year was the year I wasn't the weirdo listening to Bruce Springsteen, but I was known as the Bruce Springsteen head, and now my guy was top dog. And Billy Squier had that video where he pranced around and ended his career, and so vindication, and that's a lot of what rooting for a band or an artist, you know, those grassroots, you know, that's what we're kind of after, you know. And so I guess that would be Bruce Springsteen's Blood Brothers as your example. And I will also, let's see, we got to look up the songs that's on the list. and I don't know if I'm making any sense, and I hate this. I don't want to edit it out because I don't edit this, but I hate when people like have to do their business in front of you. I've already broken my own rule of having something to drink. I used to never take a sip on stage, but that was also a mistake, and it was also these insane puritanical, oh, this is a good one, this next song. So last week we did Dreams by Gabriell. I'll put that in the description on this one because we're always one behind, and you always have to stay in the flow of what's next. But this next song on my all-time playlist, which is again random and not selected for rock criticism or not selected for importance. There's no Abbey Road stuff on it, or even any Born to Run on it, or Jungleland or Rising. I don't think there's any Bruce on it, and he's my favorite artist. This is the one that is compiled by how many spins it gets, and it's randomized because of Flights of Fancy and jam sessions and just what I want to hear when you get a new song. And for an older cat who couldn't afford to buy every single and every track he loved or everything he heard, it's actually an exciting thing to be able to have your hands on all these songs, right? So as a fan, which is probably bad for the artist, I understand I am guilty of using, you know, the way the industry has changed to, you know, to the demise of, you know, maybe the idea of a middle class artist or a middle class actor with the streamers and all that stuff. All these ramifications that make it harder for us to do what we swore to do. I hope I am, you know, I may be complicit in that. But this next artist her name is Lizzie, and I came across her. There was a show. I think it started on Amazon. I'm not exactly sure where it originally aired, and I think I watched it on a binge, so it's made the rounds on the streamers. It was on Netflix for a while. There was a show called Louder Milk, and it's a show with Ron Livingston as the namesake, and he's an alcoholic former rock critic of all things. And I would probably guarantee that he is a contemporary of mine, so he typifies that Gen X, you know, crossing over into, and the idea was that he was like a Rolling Stone famous kind of rock critic, like an acerbic Cameron Crowe, and fell on hard times, and now it's set in Seattle, and he's sort of, you know, running Alcoholics Anonymous group or some variation of it. You got your boy, there's some crazy cast of characters, which I think are Canadian, so that's why they don't seem familiar. But there's some funny people, and I think the Farrelly brother, one or both of them are involved somehow. Will Sasso is the other known entity on that show. But there's an episode where this character, Lizzie Poole, he somehow randomly someone comes across her album that he panned back in the day. He said it was sucked, but then he's even listening to it now, and he's like, this is really good, what is this? And he finds out that he was, you know, wrong about that album, or, you know, in his opinion, he has an about face on it, and then he reads the article and he really shit on it. And it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's a great story arc. And so he, you know, tries to make amends in a very fucked up way, and he finds out that she's still in Seattle, and she runs a vintage store, and she doesn't play anymore. And, you know, he starts to play God a little bit, and they run into there's a nemesis he goes to this coffee shop where he hates the coffee and he hates the owner, and it's like an antagonistic running gag, kind of the opposite of the Friends coffee shop. His place is the coffee sucks and it's expensive, but it's also doubles as a record store, right? Or used or whatever, vinyl. And so they've befriended each other. I think they're on their way to romance, but they befriended each other, and they're at the coffee shop, and the dude who's in a band doubling as an actor, he's in his own band, really good singer. He sees Lizzie, and he's like, holy shit, Lizzie Poole, you're in my coffee shop. And he cajoles her to sing. And she's very resistant because she's put that dream down. And even Loudermilk, the Ron Livingston character, he's like, come on, give her a fucking break, man. Like, he's very defensive, and he doesn't want to have her be badgered because he's carrying guilt of, decimating someone's artistic vision, or had some hand in her career derailing. But somehow she's badgered enough to do it. And you can look this up, just this scene on YouTube. But Lizzie Poole, played by this recording artist Lizzie, who's a good actor and a great singer and player, she gets the guitar and she sings this song, When I'm Alone. But she's doing her just acoustic version. And the way they capture it, and the way it sneaks up on you, and how good the song is, and how good she is at playing, and she just sort of is in the pocket, and it creates a moment. And then the way they pan the crowd, and it's like there's people in the coffee shop record store digging in the crates, and they're like, holy, they're hearing it. Real art, real good music, real good. And that's the first time I heard the song by Lizzie called When I'm Alone. And it might even be better when she's alone doing the acoustic version on the TV show, but it's a great song, and I think she had some success, and I don't know, chicken and egg. I think she was a known entity selling records. She has a couple of hits, and the beauty of the streaming is that I'm familiar with her work. I don't know what she's doing now, but Lizzie's When I'm Alone, and this is a pleasant surprise that this is the song we're talking about this week, just because of how it came to, be heard. It was an organic discovery. And often I wind up Shazamming songs, and I don't know how many Shazam songs wind up on this list, but a fair amount. And most of the time they're in shows, and a lot of stuff like, not mainstream American fodder, but, there's a show, Shoresy, about a hockey league in Canada. They have really good music. But Lizzie, and the beautiful moment that is created in this directing, acting, singing context, when she's done singing, she's like, I haven't done that in a long time. And he goes, how did that feel? And she goes, it feels really good. And that's what moved me, is that she put it to bed because of a critic. And I guess this is all spoilers for Loudermilk, spoilers. I haven't ruined too much of it for you, but as it goes, he starts to try to like build her confidence up and encourage her, and then she winds up putting it all back together again. But then, of course, the big reveal and the betrayal, spoiler. The big betrayal is that after she sings that, after he's sort of been instrumental to her reemerging, the guy says, Loudermilk, how do you know Lizzie Poole? And she's like, Loudermilk, you're the motherfucker who wrote that article. And that's the big twist in that moment. And, more stuff happens, and she starts to put it all back together. And the big lesson she learned was, she's mad. She's like, you really hurt me. That really fucking derailed everything. But eventually she comes to understand, spoiler alert, that she goes, I wasn't ready to handle that, because anybody who would have been ready might have been able to still navigate through that. But I wasn't ready to hear it, or I wasn't ready to take it, or I wasn't ready to weather those storms. And so it's very astute writing. It's very organically concocted, and spoke to me. Much of that show is stuff you have to swallow down just to get through the some of the lesser storylines, but because it does ramble all over the place. It's very interesting. But that Lizzie Poole storyline, man, if that were your first season, boy, that would have been an all-timer. But so Lizzie When I'm Alone with You. I would encourage you know what? I'll put both versions if I can find. I'll put the link to her singing it on Louder Milk, and I'll put her album track so you can hear the difference in the development. But you can, when she's singing, you could tell that she's worn that sweater a bunch. You know, it's a broken in leather jacket, and she knows her way around it, and she knows how to use her voice, and she's a pro and very talented, Lizzie. When I'm Alone, and I hope I have steered out of the dystopia of George Orwell for 1984, and I hope this ramble, I don't know, leaves you a little less alone. Look for your brothers and blood sisters, and I guess I'll save a story for another day because I don't want to put too many songs in the description this week. But I have a story for next week about another song that I searched and found. So until next week, I will say peace.